Great. Well, let's make a start. It's nice to see you all. My name is Natalie Doswald. I'm Senior Officer for Nature-Based Solutions at IFRC. I'll be moderating today's event, which is on integrating ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction into humanitarian programming. So first of all, let's just set a little bit of context. What is ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction? So it is one of the approaches under the umbrella term nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions, what does that entail? It entails a whole host of approaches, but in general, it aims at protecting, restoring, or sustainably managing ecosystems to address societal challenges. And in this case, we are talking about specifically reducing disaster risk. So the agenda for today, I will be just a very brief intro onto why nature-based solutions in humanitarian contexts, with a little bit of background also on the interest at the International Federation for Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. And then I will be passing over to Saida Gohari, who's Senior Technical Advisor on ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction based at UNEP, who will explain this large project that is soon nearing its end and under which this talk will give some examples and small projects on. Then I will pass on to Marissa Clark-Marshall, who is Coordinator of Partnerships and Planning at the Trinidad and Tobago Country Cluster Delegation for the Dutch and English-speaking Caribbean at IFRC. She will be giving a bit more of an overview of nature-based solutions in the Caribbean and some lessons learned from looking overall at 4 countries that been working in to further the nature-based solutions in this particular context, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction into the work of the Red Cross. And then we will have 2 country experiences, one from Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross, Stefan Gisor from the Crisis Management Coordinator will be presenting, and then afterwards from the Jamaica Red Cross, Kevin Douglas, who's Emergency Services Manager and Resilient Island Manager. And of course, we'll hopefully have some time for question and answers. Feel free also to add any questions you have in the chat. We will come back to them. I would ask if you could ensure that you leave your microphones off, unless during the question and answer we invite you to speak. But great to see all of you joining. Thank you for introducing yourself, and feel free to continue to do so. So first of all, just talking of humanitarian world at IFRC, we really have decided to step up our ambition on both climate and environmental crisis. We really see in our day-to-day work in countries with people that both the climate and environmental crisis is increasing disaster risk. We have for over a few years now been improving our ambitions and our strategy. We've signed up to the Climate and Environment Charter of Humanitarian Organizations. And overall, our strategy includes, as you can see, these actions. On the one hand, scaling up climate-smart disaster risk reduction, early action and preparedness, and this includes nature-based solutions, as well as working on reducing health impacts of climate change, address climate displacement, and also enable climate-resilient livelihoods and ecosystem services, which is another area which nature-based solutions can serve us well. But to enable us to do all of this in our sector, we really need to think of do some priority actions, such as increasing our understanding of the issues, influencing investments, also our own policies and plans. And this is what this talk today will showcase a bit more, how we work to further this mainstream in our context, and also to obviously strengthen expertise within our network and develop tools and approaches. So that's our general ambition for the International Federation for Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies of improving our work on environment and climate. And as I said, nature-based solutions is one of the ways that we feel is important to address a crisis. So some of you may be wondering, why nature-based solutions for humanitarian aid? Surely there are other more important things, and it's one thing that could be helpful. Of course, we will continue working in our general way, responding to crisis and providing needed shelter and assistance. But we have observed that nature-based solutions can really contribute to an imperative of preventing and alleviating human suffering. Why? Because ecosystem degradation is a risk driver. It can cause disasters and humanitarian crisis. And we also know that when our operations are not undertaken with environmental safeguards, they can also damage further the environment. So that's on one side. We're trying to reduce risk all over by taking into account the environment. But furthermore, nature-based solutions themselves provide extra benefits to humanitarian outcomes. They can help improve health, food, and water security, along with providing protective functions against shocks and stresses. And when we work on nature-based solutions with people, they can really, in some circumstances, obviously not all, but they can contribute to cost-effective, durable solutions and contribute to building immediate and long-term resilience. This is a brief overview of why we feel this topic is important and why we are working on it. I would like to now hand over to Saida Gouhari from UNEP to give us an overview of their work, because IFRC and UNEP have been working hand in hand. So over to you, Saida. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. My name is Saida Gouhari, Senior Technical Advisor with the Disasters and Conflict Branch of UNEP. Thank you for joining today's session. Next slide, please. As Natalie pointed out, and as we all know, many disasters trigger a vicious cycle of socioeconomic and environmental impacts that lead to erosion of assets, deterioration of living conditions, poor nutrition, and many more. Subsequently, these impacts lead to a decrease in coping capacity, which increases the vulnerability of people to future shocks and limits pathways out of poverty and self-reliance. Those conditions can stoke conflict and social unrest, leading to widened inequality, undermining humanitarian, peace building, and development gains. So for about 2 decades now, UNEP and partners are trying to combine sustainable management of ecosystems with disaster risk reduction, or Eco-DRR. This includes ecosystem conservation, management, and restoration, but also integrated planning tools such as early warning systems or combining with engineering structures. UNEP played a catalyzing role by bridging science and policy through generating knowledge and best practices based on latest science, practitioner knowledge, and experiences. Eco-DRR was also showcased through various pilot initiatives and case studies from different ecosystems and using a variety of ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction techniques. For example, food security and disaster resilience in Sudan, water resource management and disaster risk reduction in Democratic Republic of Congo, sustainable and resilient development planning in Afghanistan, ridge to reef approach in Haiti. Next slide, please. So our most recent project, with funding support from the European Commission, UNEP has been implementing a large-scale project with support from the Partners for Resilience Consortium since 2018. 2018, and the project is coming to an end in the next couple of months. The overall communication objective of the upscaling community resilience through Eco-DRR project are to raise global recognition of Eco-DRR solutions and catalyze Eco-DRR actions for building community and national resilience against disasters and climate change impacts, while also contributing towards implementation of the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Climate Change Agreement in countries. The project aimed to enhance resilience of communities and countries to disasters, including from climate risks, through the scaling up of Eco-DRR implementation. Next slide, please. The project tried to showcase 3 approaches of upscaling Eco-DRR. First, through leveraging, Eco-DRR approaches are integrated in planned and ongoing large-scale public and private investments for poverty alleviation, development, risk reduction, and climate change mitigation and adaptation, in focusing mainly in India. The second approach is demonstrating Eco-DRR through field projects implementation in 5 countries: Haiti, Ethiopia, India, Indonesia, and Uganda. The third approach was through mainstreaming. The project also strengthened capacities of national, regional, and global level institutions, from public, civil society, and private sectors to mainstream Eco-DRR in the development, risk reduction, adaptation, and biodiversity programs, by targeting multiple countries. At the outcome level, various global, regional, and national initiatives were developed and strengthened to upscale Eco-DRR, including the 4 Caribbean countries that we are talking about today. Next slide, please. UNEP collaborated with the Kerala Institute for Local Administration in India to provide technical support and capacity building for one of the world's largest development programs, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, or IMGNRX, so that the initiative undertaken by IMGNRX are more effective in reducing the impacts of hazards on vulnerable populations, or in other words, increasing the resilience to current and future hazard events. This was undertaken from a simultaneous bottom-up and top-down approach. First, through capacity building activities at the grassroots level, then through providing technical guidance on Eco-DRR. For example, an Eco-DRR handbook was developed and disseminated. It's also available online for others if you're interested to look into it. Then through providing support at the state level, for example, Eco-DRR was included in the local disaster management plan. Then through to further scale up at the national level, a policy memo was shared with national stakeholders for inclusion in their policy framework. Next slide. Okay, a number of community-based models for scaling up Eco-DRR with local actors were used to demonstrate Eco-DRR implementation. This was implemented by the Partners for Resilience Consortium. Each country project is focused on 3 elements: ecosystem restoration and protection, disaster risk reduction, and climate-smart livelihoods, with slightly different approaches based on the context of these different countries. In Uganda, the focus was on strengthening river catchment management through multi-stakeholder engagement to reduce and prevent flood, drought, and soil loss in order to tackle food insecurity. In Haiti, Haiti worked on enhancing and upscaling Eco-DRR activities in drought-affected areas to strengthen communities' coping capacities and reducing food insecurity. Indonesia focused on extension and upscaling of Indonesia Peatland Partnership Fund for improved community-based peatland management and use to prevent both flooding and drought. In India, the project focused on upscaling and mainstreaming Eco-DRR approaches to lake basins and dryland area in order to manage water-induced risks. In Ethiopia, the project focused on upscaling Eco-DRR through integration in existing planning and risk management processes to prevent drought, diseases, and conflict over water resources. Next slide, please. The project also tried to catalyze new investments in ecosystems and new Eco-DRR initiatives through capacity building, technical guidance, and advocacy in 4 areas. The mainstreaming of Eco-DRR, for example, focused in 5 regional centers. Support was provided to 5 regional knowledge centers, and also opportunity mapping exercises were conducted in 13 countries. Eco-DRR practices were mainstreamed into local and national institutions, implementing DRR, development and biodiversity program, and also by private sector in around 10 countries. And then a number of technical guidelines for key global policy framework agreements were developed and disseminated. Next slide, please. So UNEP and IFRC have been collaborating over the years, including through the Partnership for Environment and Disaster Risk Reduction, which was established in 2008. For those who are new, PEDR is a global alliance of UN agencies, NGOs, and specialist institutes, which aims to strengthen the resilience of communities through improving ecosystem management for disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. Through PEDR, UNEP, IFRC, and IFRC have been providing expertise and advocate for policy change and best practices in ecosystem management for DRR and climate change adaptation. For example, PEDR provided technical expertise on words into action guidelines on NBS for disaster risk reduction. UNEP's work on mainstreaming NBS in the humanitarian sector has led to this new collaboration with IFRC. This includes developing initiatives on mainstreaming Eco-DRR in 4 national Red Cross societies in Jamaica, Belize, Grenada, and Trinidad and Tobago. The aim was to better understand how NBS for disasters and climate resilience can be implemented through humanitarian sector. The 4 countries each have developed at least 1 action document to upscale Eco-DRR into their programming. I will leave this to the IFRC and the country teams to present on their results. The next slide, please. Some of the key lessons learned that we have from implementing this project are the power of partnership. The project successfully leveraged on established partnership. The partnership for environment and disaster risk reduction to help upscale Eco-DRR at the international, regional, and national levels. Also empowering youth and inclusivity. Our in-person and online courses reach thousands of young people, of which at least half are women, and we continue to receive positive feedback. Enabling positive policy change. Our policy papers, trainings, guidelines, and conferences events have supported increased uptake of Eco-DRR at the national levels. Also, connecting disasters and climate change to the humanitarian development and peace nexus. Given that disasters and climate change undermine humanitarian development and peace efforts, it is important to create synergies and common goals to incorporate Eco-DRR and NBS into the programming of these pillars in order to maximize resources and outcomes for the resilience building of the society. And the partnership with IFRC and the Red Cross Society is an effort towards this objective. Next slide, please. Finally, those interested to learn more about NBS and Eco-DRR, please join our massive online course that was jointly developed with PEDER partners. The MOOC is open until the end of August this year. Next slide. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Said, for giving an overview of your work and the results of your project, which is coming to an end. I'd like to now invite Marissa to go a little bit more in depth into the work in the Caribbean on nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Zahida. Good afternoon, good morning. Hello, everyone. I am Marissa Clark-Marshall. I am the coordinator for partnerships and planning for the IFRC's country cluster delegation in the English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean. So our office is based in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, which is about 7 miles from the coast of Venezuela. And we coordinate and support and partner with 13 national societies, Red Cross national societies. So we have 3 continental countries that we support: Belize, Suriname, and Guyana. And we also support the islands in between, from the Bahamas to Trinidad and Tobago, and including Jamaica and the Eastern Caribbean, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada, and if I've left anyone out, I do apologize. I'm sure I have. And so it's my pleasure to speak to the collaboration with UNEP and to address some of the overall issues and considerations. So this afternoon, I will take you through very briefly how the role of nature-based solutions in the Caribbean from the Red Cross perspective. We will speak a little more in detail about the UNEP funded project and that collaboration. You heard some of that information from Zahida, and we will speak to about the 4 Red Cross national societies. I would not go in too much with respect to Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago, because we have our colleagues here who will present case studies. And we will reflect on the lessons learned from the IFRC network. When I speak about the IFRC network, I speak about the Secretariat and the national societies. Next slide, please. So in the region, you may recall in 2017, we had a very devastating year for the Caribbean due to the impacts of 2 major hurricanes, Irma and Maria. They were like category 5 hurricanes. And of course, since 2017, we have had at least one major hydrometric event every year, including Hurricane Dorian. In 2019, we have hurricanes Eta and Iota that affected Belize in a serious way, Hurricane Lisa. We have had extreme flooding events in Suriname, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Jamaica, just to name a few. And this is all superimposed with COVID and volcanic eruptions, etc. So the Caribbean is one of the more highly vulnerable areas, and community resilience building for many years. But we realized that we needed a modified approach to resilience building in communities. And we realized that is, it would require thinking outside of the box. And so integrating nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based approaches alongside our community-based approaches to address the impact of climate change and to promote climate change adaptation and Eco-DRR was necessary and critical, and was aligned with our new strategy 2030 and all the efforts to scale up our resilience building. And lastly, for those who would have been at the beginning of the session, would have put our Red Cross initiatives into context. So we deliberately, as I said, had to reach outside of our comfort zone by engaging some non-traditional partners, such as the Nature Conservancy and Wetlands International, to embody the unique value of the Red Cross when it came to community engagement. But we also noted that engaging partners that have a strong experience in science and conservation was also necessary. So thinking outside the box, as I said before, several projects have contributed to the greening of our Red Cross Resilience Program. And these included the Resilience Islands Project, which was, as I said before, a partnership with the Nature Conservancy, Community Resilience Building Project, which was a partnership with the Canadian Red Cross, funded by the as a back donor by Global Affairs Canada, and mainstreaming Eco-DRR, which is currently, and you'll hear more from Kevin, currently being implemented in Jamaica. And of course, this current project that we are discussing today. And so our partnership with UNEP, even though the IFRC, as Sahida pointed out, would have had a long-standing partnership, it was the first time in the Caribbean that we have partnered with UNEP specifically on implementing nature-based solutions. So that's something that we really appreciate, that collaboration. What we've realized, as I said before, strong partnerships, whether it's at the community or government level or non-traditional regional partnerships, is key. And one of the things that we, as part of our efforts to integrate and infuse nature-based solutions, we realized that we had to, what we call, and I saw Natalie had that on her first slide, greening the red. So one of the major things that we did, and you would hear probably more from Kevin from the Jamaica Red Cross, was to green our standard community-based tools, such as our roadmap to community resilience, which is a step-by-step approach in terms of how to reach resilience and how to engage communities and have them partner with us and partner with the Red Cross national societies to build their resilience and to understand what their issues were. That tool, we infused a lot of green aspects, and we also, our traditional VCA, our enhanced VCA, those were some of the tools, that was one tool, sorry, that identified and allowed the communities to identify risks and vulnerabilities and looked at their capacities in terms of how they build resilience. One tool that was developed under the Resilience Islands Project, a new tool, was the CAN checklist, and communities adapting with nature checklists, because we felt that it was a tool that we needed when we went into the communities to do our assessments, to ensure that we took into consideration nature and to allow communities to understand the importance of conserving those ecosystems and coming up with nature-based solutions that would also protect not life, but also livelihoods. One of the things we have, or one of the areas that we have worked in, especially, and what we have found, and I saw Sahida had it as a lesson learned, is the need for policy and advocacy. The primary objective of the policy and advocacy work, what we do is to strengthen disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, law and policy frameworks through the inclusion of nature-based solutions. And so, for instance, with the Resilience Islands project, a lot of work has been done both as in terms of assessing, analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of our legal and policy framework in DRR and climate change adaptation, and the development of recommendations for generating a clear path for improvement in a way that optimizes the potential of NBS. And this project, the Eco-DRR project that we are discussing today, also has addressed this. And the future in policy is advocating for the inclusion of nature-based solutions in law and policy frameworks. And this will continue to be a priority for the Red Cross in the Caribbean, and to utilize our auxiliary role where we support government agencies and to advocate for that type of adjustment of our frameworks. And this is also based on evidence and recommendations, and one of the things that the Resilience Islands project did, and what we are using in other projects such as this, such as the greening, mainstreaming Eco-DRR, we call it greening DRR in the Caribbean. The fact is that it is important to use the science to inform policy, and therefore you have that evidence-based research and as evidence-based perspective to advocate for changes with our government in the national context. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we spoke about the collaboration of UNEP. And Sahida gave a general overview of the project. We wanted it to be about 12 months. It boiled down to 9 months. And so, as we say in the region, it was paced, very, very intense. So the main objective, as you see, is to strengthen knowledge and capacities to integrate Eco-DRR in their institutional planning, priorities, and/or targets. And so the project, I just wanted the collaboration, yes, but among UNEP, the IFRC, Belize, Grenada, Jamaica Red Cross, and Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross societies. But because from what I would have spoken about before and what Natalie would have introduced, this is in alignment with what the Red Cross and Red Crescent network understands as being very important. As Natalie said, identified climate change as a major humanitarian crisis. And so the 3 objectives or sub-objectives of the project is to strengthen institutional capacities and uptake of Eco-DRR approaches in the 4 national Red Cross national societies, to support Red Cross national Red Cross societies in the target countries to develop plans for integrating Eco-DRR into the Red Cross program, and or to develop multi-stakeholder national initiatives on Eco-DRR, a tall order. So like the national roadmap for how to, for enhanced resilience to disasters, and to document, most importantly, to document models for Eco-DRR mainstreaming in the Red Cross national programming, including lessons learned, barriers and opportunities, and next steps, very important. And so several activities were undertaken. One major activity would have been strengthening institutional capacities. We found that it was important that in order to implement a project like this, because it's more than just a project, I want to say that it's something, as I said, is integral to what we believe in as the Red Cross Red Crescent network, but it is important to build that capacity. We are small islands, small island developing states, and our institutions, both the Red Cross national societies and our national institutions, are also small, and small in terms of human resources, and also sometimes in terms of capacity building. So one of the major activities was the training. So we held 2 virtual training sessions in Eco-DRR using the Nature Navigator as a guide, which is a tool that was developed, and Keisha and Kevin will speak more to that, and used under the Resilience Islands project. The training ran from January to February in 2023. So it was very recent. The IFRC also hosted a webinar on nature-based solutions and Eco-DRR in December 2022. For those who were merely curious about what Eco-DRR was. So it was not a training per se, but it was an awareness initiative. And also, in terms of Jamaica Red Cross, and I'm sure Kevin will speak more to it, additional staff and volunteers and stakeholders. And I spoke about partnership before, because one of the things that we address is that partner and the need to not only train ourselves as Red Cross, but to recognize the importance of working together at the national level as well. And so stakeholders were trained together with the Jamaican Red Cross staff and volunteers in Jamaica on EVCA. So we are building our cadre of professionals, as well as volunteers, as well as community groups who understand what EVCA is all about, and how to understand risk and vulnerabilities for their communities. And it was used as a face-to-face opportunity to include specific activities or specific learnings on Eco-DRR. And Eco-DRR solutions to reduce that disaster risk around communities. So 4 participating countries held dialogues with their stakeholders about Red Cross national societies and how they can integrate Eco-DRR into their programs. Most countries use meetings that they were invited to, and that worked well, especially when, again, capacity, you don't have as much time as you would like to raise the questions or raise the opportunities on topics on Eco-DRR. One of the other things that activities done was to develop plans to integrate Eco-DRR into Red Cross, Red Crescent programs. So the IFRC conducted an analysis on nature-based solutions and Eco-DRR gaps in policies, laws, etc. in Trinidad, in Belize and Trinidad and Tobago. And remember, I spoke to that happening in Jamaica and Grenada under the RI project, the Resilience Islands project. And so what we now have is like 4 countries within the region, and I have to add maybe 5, Dominican Republic, which is not part of our cluster, but it's definitely part of the Caribbean and was part of the Resilience Islands program, that have assessments and analysis on gaps.
Marissa,
yes.
If it's okay, if we can move on a little quickly, as time is running.
Sure, definitely. So next slide, then we can speak very quickly to in terms of the 4 national societies are in different stages in terms of their capacities with respect to Eco-DRR programs and plans. And I'm not going to go through into detail, but I will say that because as I was warned, time is up. But I'm taking the opportunity to just speak a little bit about Belize, because Belize Red Cross, although not presenting, I understand the Director General and their technical persons in the audience. And Belize, as one of the national societies, has been using ecosystem services since 2014, so almost 10 years, and not necessarily looking at it as Eco-DRR, but they have been very successful in their recent project with the Canadian Red Cross, the CRB project, Community Resilience Project, where they used the use of the Maya nut tree in several communities to generate income and reduce risks associated with droughts and storm events. So it was a livelihood generating project, and that was an Eco-DRR solution. And so, next slide, I will pass you over to Natalie. Oh, let me, right, in terms of the lessons learned, sorry, basically what we want to say, and I'm not going to go through in the stages, we can share the, we can share the presentation, but partnerships is the key. Partnerships, looking for non-traditional partners, being realistic about project implementation and setting realistic timeframes, because working with communities, you need time, and you need time for communities to understand, and you need time for engagement. Advocacy should be gentle, persuasive, but not aggressive, especially in the Caribbean, where we have limited resources at both the civil society and the national level. Learning and knowledge crucial to raise the level of understanding and building capacity. And it allows us to build trust with other organizations. And it's, you know, we understand the need for engaging and effective learning, and obviously improving the chances of future success. So thank you very much. And I will pass you back to Natalie.
Thank you very much, Marissa. It's a really fascinating talk, but it's, yes, sorry to cut your little short. We're going to move now to hear from the countries that are experienced in this work. As Marissa said, different stages in terms of their mainstreaming, so it'll be really interesting. We'll start off with Trinidad and Tobago, who'll be presenting past Eco-DRR. So Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. A pleasure to be with you today to talk a little bit about our experience with this project and where it has really set the pathway for us in terms of advancing. So you saw in Marissa's slide, we're at stage 1, which is a really good pathway for us to be. So as an organization, you know, we have learned a lot of lessons from this. So you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so from this project, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done with the project, talked about some of our lessons and barriers, and then the way forward, which is the key thing that we are really, you know, grateful for the project, because it really set a good pathway for us to now develop more, because we saw a lot of our gaps to really be a good implementer of nature-based solutions in communities. Next slide, please. So the organization as a whole, we've been around, this year we'll celebrate our 60th anniversary. So we've had a lot of community-based experience, and the community really trusts us for implementing projects that is not just, you know, touching the surface, but really works on sustainability, so the community really benefits over time. But in terms of climate and environmental programming, we see it as a really strategic avenue for us as a country. You know, we're one of the unique countries where we have or were very dependent on oil and gas for our economy. Now that we're changing and transitioning into renewable energies, we're also trying to get communities to start thinking about how they transition out of dealing with, you know, the traditional ways of disaster risk reduction, now thinking about NBS and EBA. So in 2021, to create some structure, we developed a 5-year environmental program that would really align to our strategic mandates and chart the next 5 years between 2022 and 2026 on how we will be implementing in more environment and climate change adaptation work. Next slide, please. So one of the key things in the project allowed us to do was really look holistically at our gaps. So we had this opportunity to develop our 5-year program in 2021, but it also showed that as an organization, we really need to do a lot more work in order to build or meet our targets by 2026. So the project allowed us to look both internally as an organization and then look at our partners and the external environment to see what we need to also focus on to be able to develop. So as an organization, for the last decade or so, we've been mapping all the things that we've been doing related to climate and the environment. And we've had really touched on the surface, right? Because we were looking at within the capacity that we had, what best that we could do and what communities really needed us to focus on. So we're really focusing on a lot of culture change, to make sure communities really understand what climate change is. So we were doing a lot of education programs with our youth. We have a strong presence within the school system and youth and communities, and we're really doing education work through the youth. And then when we're talking about disaster risk reduction programming, we're looking at doing sensitization and adaptation sensitization for these communities. So one of the key lessons that we learned is communities really don't want complicated programming, right? So that's why we had to adapt and integrate the new, well, climate change is new, but integrate that new program that we're bringing to these communities into our existing programming. So it's an add-on, because we were always getting, kickbacks from the community, not really wanting to involve themselves in new complicated, or as Marissa was talking about, scientific programming. So we had to really think about how we can now adapt the new information that we're bringing to these existing programs that the community has trusted us to implement over the years. So to do that, we had to connect with partners. One of the key things we also recognize that there's a lot of organizations that have experience and have knowledge, but they don't have the connection to the community. So we also served as that conduit, and we're now bringing in more non-traditional partners to be able to bring their technical expertise to the community through us as the Red Cross being that trusted partner. So some of our barriers that were very blatant to us, that were identified through the project, was of course the need for technical support, right? And as I just mentioned, we were able to achieve or be able to see where that technical support could come from through our partnerships with other organizations. And again, non-traditional partners that we may not have looked at working with before. It also meant that we need to build capacity internally to ensure that the team that is implementing the programs are also well knowledgeable. And we also sort of need to bring in technical expertise, looking at that technical resource. Funding is also a current challenge in terms of making sure that we're able to implement programming. And then one of the key things that we also looked at is we need to have some experience to be able to go after some of the major funding sources there. So we also realize as an organization that we need to take it in stride, that we're not jumping into major programs that we will not be able to successfully implement. So we're designing the programs over the next, well, we're 2022, so in the next 4 years to really, in bite-sized pieces so that we're able to really make a successful achievement towards 2026. We have to also realize that we're new in the field. We're not considered an environmental organization. So we were also looking at how we now take our experience with community work in disaster risk reduction and now add that environmental component to it so that we will be known as not just a disaster risk reduction organization, but also the organization that is adding value in nature-based solutions. So within our opportunities, we looked at our strong partner network, especially our leveraging our auxiliary role with the state, looking at partnerships with our National Disaster Office, our municipalities, to really bring that experience where necessary. And then Trinidad also has opportunities locally for funding, but to access those funding sources, we also needed to look at our experience. And that's one of the key things some of the funding sources told us, that we need to really build that community-based to ensure that we're able to implement environmental and nature-based solution programming before we're able to access some of the funding, so that they can see that we have that sort of experience and expertise. Next slide, please. Right, so the way forward is the most important part for us. So because we were at a lower level in terms of the development of the programs, we really looked at the success of getting a nature-based solution policy developed as our action document through this project, which will now align and give a little bit more clout to our environmental program. A lot of things had to happen internally. So we had to look at how we structure our internal processes, greening our internal processes to make sure that they're more aligned. And the policy, which is has been reviewed by stakeholders, and we were very happy that that was an integral part of the process, that we had the stakeholder consultations that came right after the draft of the policy was done, to see exactly how we could tweak and align better, so that when we are ready to now design the programs that will align to the policy, that they are more applicable to the community needs. So the next steps, based on where we are right now, is of course to submit more proposals to the various funding sources. We have an ambition to approach the Trinidad and Tobago Green Fund, which is a national platform for funding for environmental projects. We want to also expand our training to our staff and our volunteers to make sure that more persons have the capacity to implement Eco-DRR and nature-based solutions. We want to concretize some of the partnerships that we would have started the discussions with through MOUs. And of course, we want to continue our community awareness building in terms of the communities being more aware that we will be implementing environmental and nature-based solutions as part of our DRR programs in the future. Right. So short and sweet from Trinidad and Tobago.
Great, thank you very much. That was really interesting to hear about, and really fascinating. I look forward to seeing how that continues in your next steps. So we are running a bit short on time, but nevertheless, let me introduce Kevin to you from the Jamaica Red Cross, who, as you may have already gathered, has longer term experience on Eco-DRR than Trinidad and Tobago. Kevin, to you.
Thank you, Natalie. Afternoon, everyone. Certainly a pleasure for us to be here. The Jamaica Red Cross, over the last 5 years, have been quite privileged to be involved in Eco-DRR. Some of the projects Marisa would have mentioned: the Resilient Islands Project, the Greening Red Cross Red Crescent Disaster Risk Reduction Project, and of lately the UNEP support, which really assisted us, in reinforcing and further advancing the Eco-DRR targets. Next slide. So I'll briefly just look at some of the projects, some of the strategies implemented, how we went about it, and of course also look at, just mention a few of the challenges that we would have gone through. Next. So our journey in Eco-DRR, nature-based solutions, really started with the Resilient Islands project, which we started implementing in 2018, and this was in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. And this project is being implemented in the largest fishing village in Jamaica, which is known as Old Harbor Bay. So it's against a coastal backdrop. Next. So what was the focus of the Resilient Islands project? There were 4 main objectives or outputs. The first of which is what we call local level actions. So this really focused on, first thing was to how do we objectively select, for example, communities for intervention. And so in this case, we partnered with the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, which is our national disaster office. And one of the major successes of the project is that we were able to work with the disaster office to develop a tool which is known as the National Vulnerability Ranking Index, to objectively select communities for intervention. But the best part about that was that we were able to have ecosystems or nature now integrated into this tool, and the government has actually expanded it to now being a national tool. And of course, and as I said, ecosystem indicators are a major part of that. So when the government is ranking a community, for example, in terms of its vulnerability, the ecosystems are now considered as a major component. And if they're considered as a major component, then there's a great likelihood of nature-based solutions being a part. Marisa also mentioned the tools, for example, that which we focused on, greening some of those tools, updating them to ensure that ecosystem considerations are there. Policy and advocacy was also a major part. The UNEP initiative, which we just completed, helped us with this in a major way, in that we were able to continue the dialogue with government, with main stakeholders and so on, putting Eco-DRR on the front burner so that it can to increase the likelihood or the investments into it. And of course, how to mobilize resources. Next slide. So the RI project, using the roadmap to community resilience as the main implementation methodology, we would have focused heavily on human and ecological assessments. So one of the things that we have emphasized on is that pursuing Eco-DRR or nature-based solutions, one has to be careful that we don't only focus on the natural environment, but actually seek to involve the communities. So the people who occupy these spaces. So therefore, there must be an equal effort of involving the community as much as working within the natural environment, if we truly want to have sustainable risk reduction. And so the Resilient Islands Project and the Jamaica Red Cross's methodology, that has been what we have been working on, seeking to involve the local communities within this space. So for example, some of those tools that Marisa would have mentioned, the EVCA, the CAP surveys, for example, would have greened those tools so as to ensure that the data that is collected from the community there's a reflection of ecosystems. Additionally, the science behind the work was also greatly emphasized, and so additional assessments, for example, including drone mapping, benthic bathymetry surveys, rapid ecological assessments. So all of these critical data and data collection formed a part of the project approach, because if we're gonna to choose the best options for ecosystem or nature-based solutions, these assessments would have to be carried out both in the natural environment as well as among the local communities. Next slide. Just showing you some of it, right? And so out of these assessments among the people as well as within the natural ecosystem, then out of that we would have created a suite of nature-based solutions for the community of Old Harbour Bay. So this is a list of solutions which can be implemented to both reduce the risks as well as enhancing livelihoods and protecting the natural ecosystem. So for example, a mangrove restoration plan would have been developed for 2 of the critical areas in Old Harbour Bay, which will significantly reduce the risk from overland flooding, as well as build resilience to coastal flooding. And so we would have commenced mangrove restoration on a small scale in one of those areas. And we're still awaiting the necessary clearances that we need from government and permits so that we can begin to undertake and expand mangrove restoration within this particular area. And of course, the partnerships with the Nature Conservancy and government and other NGOs and so on significantly assist in this process. So definitely maintaining partnerships. For also, we have formed a technical advisory group under the Resilient Islands Project, which continues to serve as a tab basically for the Jamaica Red Cross and our ecosystem work, which includes government persons from academia, universities, all of those critical stakeholders maintain a part of our approach, so that whatever is implemented and plans and so on continue to be brought before these persons, and so their expertise continues to be brought to bear upon our actions. Next. So the Greening Red Cross and Red Crescent Disaster Risk Reduction Project is another of those initiatives which we have been very privileged to be implementing. And of course, the methodology which would have been developed and used during the Resilient Islands Project, we continue to do that. So we have kept Old Harbour Bay as one of the target communities. So this project is being implemented in 3 communities, one of which is Old Harbour Bay, because the suite and so would have been established. So the idea is just to go right into implementation. Now we're implementing in 2 other two other communities, one called Woodford and another called Rock River. So there'll be 3 communities, and then there is now a ridge to reef approach because these communities, one of them is very at the top of the watershed, Old Harbor Base to the end of it, and of course the other community somewhere midway. Next. So these, as I said, we continue the implementation, some additional assessments. For example, in Rock River, you would see an agroforestry assessment, for example, being done, and stakeholder mapping and so on continue. Additionally, we are forming what we call Eco-DRR teams within these communities. So this group of persons, for example, will be trained and will be responsible for overseeing disaster risk reduction in the community, pretty much similar to a community disaster response team. But of course, the ecosystems and the natural environment would be a key part of what they will oversee and what they will do. All right, so we continue to do that. As I said, also the benefits of the UNEP initiative would still we're still reaping and benefiting that. For example, the existing data and ecosystem review which was carried out, that very much brought a better picture of where Eco-DRR is within the country, and of course served again to re-engage the government and other partners. Next slide. And finally, some of the challenges for Eco-DRR work. One is to keeping the local communities engaged and supportive during the process. Sometimes the assessment processes are lengthy, and so sometimes if you're not careful, we're able to lose community members, and so keeping them engaged is very, very critical. And one of the lessons we have learned and as well too is we don't have to wait until all the assessments are completed. So for example, if assessments are completed and we can begin implementation of 1 or 2 of the solutions, then we'll do that. So implement progressively rather than at the end of all the assessments. Additionally, of course, the challenge of convincing local governments, local communities, governments, and so on, that Eco-DRR works in comparison to the traditional gray solutions is one of those challenges. So, of course, as the lessons are learned and the success stories are developed, then we seek to share that so as to reinforce this. And of course, one of the other major issues we face is if it's, for example, if the nature-based solutions is being done in areas within the community, then land tenure issues may form an issue. For example, if it's government lands and the various bureaucracy and so on that are needed, tend to be a challenge. So of course, what we've learned from that is to seek to establish that these permits are in place or the discussions start even long before we get to that point. So that's in general a picture of the story in Jamaica briefly. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And thank you for those of you who have stayed on. We are nearly 5 minutes, a bit over time, but it was a pleasure to hear these different experiences on Eco-DRR in 2 of the countries. With a little, I see that Keisha has her hand up. So Keisha, if you would like to input something.
Yes, hopefully everyone is hearing me. I want to say thanks to all the speakers. You guys did a marvelous job. And really to thank the UNEP project, because I think given our experiences in the Caribbean, we had Marissa talking about what was happening in Belize and in Grenada, and Kevin giving a bit more detail of what was happening or what is happening in Jamaica. I think the UNEP project offered the Caribbean an opportunity to really sit back and analyze where are we exactly and how do we move forward with countries who are not yet engaged in Eco-DRR? How do we get them involved? What are some of the points that may interest an organization, a national society, for example, like Dominica, who is starting this kind of work, or maybe another one that is probably just thinking about it and not thinking that it may be something that they would be interested in. So understanding what were the lessons, what are the models that we can then use, I think is something that was valuable from this project. Over.
Thank you, Keisha. And with that, I think you've given us a really nice wrap up I also very much thank you for giving us a wrap up. Keisha, Sandy's working also at IFRC and has been a key person on this project. So Keisha, thank you so much. And I would also like to thank all of the presenters and of course all of you participants, and I hope you enjoy the next week and a half at HNPW, and that is it from me. So I'm wishing you all a good afternoon and evening where you are based. Thank you and goodbye.